folks? Coming back again for another stream. Just gonna keep it chill for now on. Someone's in chat. Someone asks questions. I'll respond. But other than that, I'll just do what I normally do. This is more for going through tutorials and just learning as I go. Putting up a video for people to see that it's not easy. And yeah, it takes time. This is what we all go through when we're learning. So yeah. Other than that, I'll be muted until I see some response. So thanks for watching. Let's go.
that is not intended. So that means that on each grid object, we need to store some data based on what building is already on there. So over here on the grid object, let's add another field. Let's name it a transform for the transform that is placed on top of this grid object. Then just some simple function to set it and get it. So when to set the transform, and when to clear it, which we're going to use later when we implement demolish. And let's also modify the toString to also include what transform is on there. So just make a new line and then the transform. And also the way that the debug visual is set up, the grid class needs to know when something changes. So just here, just trigger a grid object change, pass in this one and this one. Just so that the grid knows when something changes, and then it updates the text. Okay, so we have our transform, and now let's make a simple function to test if we can build. So just a public returns a boolean, let's call it can build, and here it's very simple, we just return if the transform is null. So if transform is null, then we can build, if it is not null, then we cannot build. Okay, so now here on our update, we get the grid position. All right, now before we instantiate, let's go into the grid and we get the grid object on this X and this Z. So this returns our grid object. And now here we go into the grid object and we ask if we can build, and if so, then we are going to build it. And after we instantiate, let's do a build transform to grab our reference. Then we go into the grid object and we set the transform to this one. So we build and we set it, and if not, then that means that we cannot build. So for this, let's spawn a fun pop-up message. So here I'm using this function from the utilities, which you can grab for free from unitycodemonkey.com, or of course you can make your own warning message, like for example the tooltip that I covered previously. Just a bit of fun, just telling the player why it cannot build. Okay, so with this, let's test. Okay.
Looks like I gotta go find the read up on that dynamic tooltip. I could probably just pull that from his utility class though, so I'll do that.
bit of fun just telling the player why it cannot build. Okay, so with this, let's test. Okay, so here I am, and if I click, yep, there you go, it gets placed, and over there on the text we can indeed see that it worked. So we can see that this grid position is now filled with a building clone, alright. And now if I click again, nope, there you go, now I see the nice pop-up saying that I cannot build because that one is already occupied. Alright, awesome. So with this, we already have a really good start. We can place down buildings anywhere you want, and we make sure that we only place them on clear ground. So this is working, but so far it's only working with this shape. However, in most games, when you have a building system, you don't usually have just a single 1x1 shape. Some things you want to place will occupy more than one grid position. So let's handle that. And by the way, if you find the video helpful, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps out the channel. For that, the first thing that you need is some way of defining each building type. And for that, over here I've got some building type scriptable objects. I covered scriptable objects in detail in another video, so go watch that if you're not familiar with them. Essentially, they are a great way to make some objects to store some data. And also, this is the same method that I used to define the building types in my Complete Builder Defender course. So this is an excellent way to define various types. Here is the script with the definition. As you can see, it's pretty simple, just a handful of fields. Over here we have a name, a transform for the final prefab, a transform for just the visual, then an integer for the width, and another one for the height. Now here we're working on the XZ plane, so really the height is really more of the length, but personally I prefer the word height. Then the other thing we have is also some functions related to direction. We're going to see those in a bit. So essentially we have the scriptable object where we can store our name and our prefab and the width and the height. And here in the editor we've got all various scriptable objects. Again, go watch that other video if you're not familiar with it. So we have multiple building types, and some of them, like for example the town hall, occupies more than one grid position. Here it uses a width and height of 2 by 2. So let's test our current code using this. First, let's refactor our code to work with the scriptable object instead of a transform directly. So here refactor our code to work with tuple or not. Essentially, we have scriptable objects where we can store our name and our prefab and width and the height. And here in the editor, we've got all various scriptable objects. Again, go watch that other video if you're not familiar with this. So we have multiple building types, and some of them, like for example the town hall, occupies more than one grid position. Here it uses a width and height of 2 by 2. So in this video, we're going to look at scriptable objects in Unity. These are objects you can create in your project files that can be used to store any kind of data and make your game more designer friendly. Extremely useful for storing level data, enemy data, weapon data, and just about anything. We're going to learn how they work, and then later we're going to apply them to systems we made previously, like the crafting system. Let's begin! Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey, and this channel is all about helping you learn how to make your own games with in-depth tutorials made by a professional indie game developer. So if you find the video helpful, consider subscribing. Okay, so scriptable objects are an excellent feature that makes your game much more designer friendly. Essentially, they are simply containers of data. You define the various fields you want your object to have, then you create instances of that object in your project files and set those fields to whatever you want. The key point is you define and store all that data in discrete objects in your project files, rather than having all of that written directly in the code. If you want to make your game more designer friendly, then scriptable objects are the way to go. Okay, so here we're going to learn the basics on how to define and create scriptable objects. And then later on, we're going to take what we learn here and apply it to the crafting system that we made previously. So the items will be defined as scriptable objects as well as the crafting recipes. This video is made possible thanks to these awesome supporters. Go to patreon.com/unitycodemonkey to get some perks and help keep the videos free for everyone. Alright, so in here, let's make a very simple scriptable object. Now down here in our project files, let's create a new C# script. Call this our test scriptable object. And let's open it. Okay, now here we have our default Unity code. Now the first thing we do is let's get rid of all of these methods. And in here, instead of extending mono behavior, we're going to extend scriptable object. And just like this, we already have a class that we can use as a scriptable object. Now, like I said, they are containers of data, and how you define whatever data you want to store is by defining some fields. So in here, let's define a public string, call it my string. Okay, now we have a scriptable object with a simple string field. Now let's see how we can create an instance of our scriptable object. Now to do that, we go up here to our class definition, and we're going to add the attribute create asset menu. Then we have three optional parameters. So first of all, let's define the file name. So this is going to be the default file name whenever we create an object. So in this case, let's just call it the same name, so test scriptable object. Then we have the menu name. So this is where it will show up on the create asset menu. So in this case, let's create a scriptable objects folder. So you create a folder by simply putting a / at the end. And then let's call it test scriptable object. And lastly, if you want, you can add the order attribute, or it doesn't matter, so let's just ignore that one. Alright, so that's it. Over here we have the most basic scriptable object definition possible. We just extend scriptable object, we define our fields, and we add the create asset menu attribute. And now if we go back into the editor, now in here on our assets folder, I can right click, go into create, and yep, over here we see scriptable objects, our very nice folder, and inside we can create a test scriptable object. So just click on it, and yep, it starts off with our default name, and for now, yep, just leave it named like that. Alright, so here we have our scriptable object. And we can see all the fields that we defined, so in this case, just a simple string. So in here, let's just write some text. Alright, there it is, and now this scriptable object has been saved with this data. Okay, now let's see how we can use this. Alright, so in here, let's create a new C# script. Call this just testing. Let's create an object to run it. And drag the script, okay. Now here, let's start off by adding a field for our scriptable object type. So we're going to make it a serialized field so we can set it in the editor. Let's make it a private of type test scriptable object. And then on the private void start, let's simply do a debug log on the test scriptable object, and we access my string. Alright, so there it is, very simple. Now back in the editor, yep, over here we have a field of type test scriptable object. So we can drag our specific scriptable object, yep, and let's try. And yep, over here we can see our very nice message. So we access the scriptable object and grab the data from it. So now to see how this is useful, we can duplicate this scriptable object. So we make a second scriptable object. And over here we give it a different string. Alright, and now go back into our testing script, and then just use this scriptable object instead. And if we run, yep, there you go, now we have the different message. So we have two different scriptable objects, each with their own instance of data, and then we have our script which works with that scriptable object type. Alright, awesome. So here we can see the most basic usage of scriptable objects. We define our object with whatever fields we want. So here, for example, we have a simple string, but we could add, for example, let's say a public int for an int field. Then we could also, for example, add a sprite array. So we can add whatever fields we want to store whatever data we require. And if we look in the editor and select our scriptable object, yep, there you go, here we have all of our fields and we can set them to anything. So for example, on this one, I can set 2 elements on this array, and then on this second one, I can select 5 elements. So yep, there you go, each of them has the same format, but different data. So we can create as many instances of this type of object as we want in order to store whatever data we need.
All right. Well, as you can probably see, I'm over here drifting off. I gotta get used to. I get used to my sleep pattern. I always get tired around this time of the day, but yeah. Looks like I gotta do a little bit of playing with the scriptable objects on this because I see what he's talking about. I understand what I have to do, but I need to make sure I implement this correctly, or else I'm not gonna be able to move forward. So, a little curious as to. I gotta put the prefab in here. I don't really know what that's gonna do, but I'll move forward a bit, not too far. And so the next time I go live with the dev stream, we'll be able to figure out what's going on. And, yeah. Anyways, all right.